What is up, theology nerds? This is Trip, and you're listening to Homebrewed Christianity. That's right. There is no need to act like light beer. Religion is the only option. You can have something tasty, crafty, and you can brew it yourself using the brain God gave you and some of the amazing resources that the academic world and the historic Christian tradition provide, and that's our goal here at Homebrewed Christianity. Today on the podcast, we are breaking the flow, you could say. Normally, I interview academics from different parts of the church, different theological perspectives around a whole host of different topics. And the goal is always to talk to these scholars and get out of them some of the biggest ideas and hear more of their story, so that through this ideological medium, the resources of the academy can be shared far and wide. But today on the podcast, we're not having a scholar. He's way too cool. Today, you get to hear from Kevin Max. That's right, Kevin Max from DC Talk, like the biggest CCM band of all time. Like, I don't even know how you go figure all that stuff out, but it's got to be the case. Anyway, Kevin Max from DC Talk, he's on here. We're going to be hearing about his story of what it's like to, when you're in college, explode and be this in a major band shaping the evangelical subculture in America. And then what is it like to be in that position as you come to ask questions and wrestle and doubt and struggle through your faith? And then what does that journey look like since then as an artist and as a person of faith, after the band broke up and he had a huge career as a solo artist and explored a whole host of different styles of music, and all the while continuing to ask questions, wrestle with his faith. And now if you follow him on the internet, he likes to say that he's of the hippie socialist Jesus variety of cosmic Christians. So we have ourselves a good old time. Here's some amazing stories, and you get to hear an artist who's reflecting about their own life and the nature of their faith. It's pretty wonderful. And before I go into this interview, I just want to say the thing that stuck out most to me, or maybe the thing I was excited to hear, is how despite the different trajectories he and his two friends who founded DC Talk together have had, their friendship remains. And that is just really, really cool. So I hope y'all enjoy this conversation. If you are new to Homebrewed Christianity because for some reason Kevin decided to talk with me because we hung out on Twitter, as opposed to going on other podcasts, then welcome. I know that normally we're talking with academics, but hey, I was a youth minister 15 years and a youth camp junkie before that, so I have sang some Kevin Max songs. I have attempted to emulate his vibrato. Oh yeah, and you'll hear more about that now. But thank you all for being here. If any of you are listening and want to make sure you keep up with all this going on, just go to tripfuller.com. You can sign up for the email list there, and you'll be one of 50,000 plus people who are saying, hey, holler at me. Let me know when the theology nerd goodness is going down. Like, we do a lot of online classes that you can sign up for. We have, post-COVID, we'll be doing live events and stuff again. And then we'll send emails out about, we'll do big book giveaways and that kind of stuff. Or when we do live streams and want to gather questions and things like that. But yeah, if you go to tripfuller.com, trip with 2 P's, you can sign up for the email list and stay connected that way. If you're new to Kevin and his work, the blog post for this episode will have links to all sorts of things. One of which is a link to the Kickstarter for his new band, the Sad Astronauts kickoff release. They have a Kickstarter that's currently going on, and you could join that and be a part of supporting this rock album that you'll hear him talk about here. And when you hear it, you're going to say to yourself, oh yeah, I'm not sad about the Sad Astronauts. I'm excited that Sad Astronauts are coming. All right, smoochy boochies. maybe the place to begin for those that don't know who Kevin is Kevin is a real rock star that also was like involved in CCM, a band called DC Talk, has gone and do some amazing solo work, is uniquely eclectic in different musical styles, also does like spoken word music and poetry. And one of the fascinating things, if people, that normally listen to this and hear me talk to academics, I would say that you're like the equivalent of Jürgen Moltmann for spiritually centered rock music, right? Like Jürgen Moltmann kind of like second half of the 20th century, he redid all sorts of things in theology. And like, if you're into it, you have to know who he is. Even if you don't like it, you're like, yeah, but he is awesome. Right. And I feel like that's a good correlation if people don't know who you are.
Okay, I'll take that. I'd say I'm a little more cosmic, but we'll get there. We'll talk about it.
I support the cosmos. So maybe we could begin by you sharing a bit about like, when did your love of music first emerge, right? Because you've had a long career and stayed in music, which plenty of musicians can't figure out how to do, but you've had all these twists and turns. But underneath it, where the creativity usually comes from someone that moves across different like types of styles and different types of albums and projects, is when you fall deeply in love with music itself.
Well, it started quite early for me, and shockingly early. Some people are like, "Wow, I mean, you really started singing when you were 4 years old." Or it's like Mark Bolan, said, "I'd come dancing out of the womb." I came singing out of the womb, and so I was, strangely enough, I was singing at 4 years old in front of people, and they thought it was so novel that they started putting me in front of crowds. And when I say they, my parents, I'd get up in front of church and sing like a line here and there, and people thought it was really cute that this 5-year-old boy had vibrato when he sang, and so my memory only goes back so far these days. I can only remember singing. I don't remember a time that I didn't sing. And it wasn't probably until high school where I found my confidence, and it was a very kind of shallow confidence because of people clapping, and I sang at an Easter cantata. Do you know what a cantata is?
Oh, yeah. I know what a cantata is. I'm a Baptist preacher's kid, and so when cantatas come out, sometimes you pay a little extra to have horns show up at church.
That's right. So there was kind of like a little tiny orchestra vibes going down at this cantata. And I was in high school, and I sang one of the leads on a song called Lonesome Valley. And it was a spiritual song. And, I tried to sing it like Stevie Wonder, and, I was doing a lot of these runs with my voice and acrobatics, if you will. And I got a standing ovation, and people were just like, "Oh my God, that guy can sing," And the thing that put it over the edge, Trip, was a girl from a rival high school was there and came up to me after the performance and said, "I'm now moving to your school so that I can date you." And she was like a cheerleader and was quite pretty, and that was it for me. I was like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life, scheming in my mind, my palms together, like this is going to work.
Yeah. I mean, so when you think of that, there's that excitement you get performing, and the potential girlfriend, and the ability to contribute to those intense holy days like Easter. One of the things I've always been fascinated by people that are deeply religious, spiritual, and artists is like, if those were nerves, metaphorically, the religion and sex nerve, they're right next to each other, and they almost always tickle each other. And part of the problem I've seen, growing up in a more evangelical context and coming out, is some of the way we talk about one or the other never acknowledges the way they're connected, and it ends up problematizing it.
Absolutely. I mean, I just proved to you right there how shallow I was as a high schooler. I probably wasn't even thinking about the lyrics to the song. I mean, I was fully into the performance angle of it. And, growing up in a, evangelical environment, I was just kind of constantly around it. And so you kind of become a little bit, a little too adept at knowing everything and not listening. And, but then again, I was probably junior in high school, maybe sophomore. So those things don't matter as much as popularity or, people giving you affirmation, whatever. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I was in middle school and high school during DC Talk's kind of biggest periods, and every youth group event played your music. So I have gone on in stage with tracks of DC Talk and attempted to get girlfriends at youth camps while impersonating you.
Wow.
It was not as successful probably as you were, but one time I even sang I Don't Want It at a True Love Waits retreat, just because the youth group that asked me to come sing had a very attractive female that liked my Kevin Max impersonation.
Yeah, there was a subtle agenda there, or not so subtle.
Well, you don't have to want all of it.
All I could say is I didn't write that song, but absolutely, man. The '90s were strange, and oh man, there's just so much to unpack there. But we'll start with growing up in Michigan. I didn't know much about Christian music at all. I listened to the Smiths and the Cure and the Fix and U2 and anything that I could find on the new wave college radio that was playing, and would walk down to the local vinyl shop. And my first, major record that kind of influenced me was Echo and the Bunnymen, Ocean Rain. So those were my influences. In fact, the majority of it was British rock or British new wave or British pop, whatever you call it, post-punk. And, it wasn't until probably, at the end of high school that I started noticing, there's this thing out there called Christian rock. And even though I was brought up in a Christian home, I didn't know much about that musical scene or that culture. And I ended up going to a Christian college at the behest of my parents, who, they knew if I didn't go to a Christian college and conform, I would become a criminal, so they were like, let's send them to Liberty University. And I didn't know anything about Jerry Falwell. I didn't know anything. And within the first year, I was kicked out of the university. And I went back home, and I was, I felt very guilty. And I grew up on a farm. And so my dad made me shovel the horse excrement for a while there as penance, and neighboring farms as well. And literally he made this proposal to me. He's like, if you get your act together and you can return, I'll help pay for, your tuition. And so I actually ended up going back to Liberty. And this is the thing that's just kind of sets it in that weird trajectory for DC Talk. Had I not gone back, and I didn't want to go back, but I wanted to also please my father. And so had I not gone back, it would have been a completely different story. I went back, became friends with Toby and Mike, because I said to myself, I got to make friends with people that are, on the up and up, and not these, these hooligan vagabonds that I was hanging out with before. And so
it's not the worst decision if you're trying not to get kicked out a second time.
And just trying to make it through college, and I didn't like the fundamentalist ideals, and I didn't jive with what was going on in the school at all. But I made friends with these guys, and I was singing in a Christian rock band, and I'm putting my fingers up in quotations for anybody that can not see that. And we were horrible, but I guess there were people there that heard my voice and thought, oh man, this guy's got something. And it got around to Toby and Mike, who were in a group together at that time called DC Talk. And that was pre me. So they asked me, they said, would you be the rock vocalist in our band? And I'm like, well, what kind of band is this? It's hip hop and singing. And I had no clue about rap or anything. The only rap that I listened to was Run DMC and maybe Beastie Boys. And I I didn't go any deeper than that. I was just what was on the radio, because I was into new wave music. And so I thought these guys were cool and they were nice, and, you know, they liked my voice. And again, it's that immediate affirmation, you know, the ego builder, you know, hey, we like you. And so I jumped in, and before, you know, I could even think about it twice, I mean, we had people all over the place telling us how amazing it was when we sang together, and Toby did his thing. So in a nutshell, you know, within, less than half a semester, we had left Liberty and had a record deal through Forefront, you know, in Nashville, because Toby had sent out a little demo tape we had made to all these different companies. And we were rejected about 5 or 6 times before Forefront was like, oh yeah, we'll take them.
I mean, I guess like the is that like sending out like Heaven Bound and that, like all the first album stuff? Because if you hear that, whoever, you know, that's like drafting Brady in the 6th round. Like, you don't hear that and go, hey, these guys are going to make the Jesus Freak record, and there'll be people that aren't Christians that actually think this is good and choose to listen to it. And like, if you just think of the growth in that time musically, I think what you're talking about, the friendship and the different places and backgrounds you bring together, and just a creative growth, like that had to be energizing to be a part of it.
Absolutely. I mean, the first demo that went out was actually had a few songs on it, beyond Heaven Bound, and it was there were a few tracks that kind of showcased my voice as well as Mike's, and I can't remember the name of the songs. Again, it's hard for me to go back and remember everything past a certain point. I think I forget everything past Jesus Freak. Or pre-Jesus Freak, I forget. Toby always says it's convenient memory there that you forget all the other records. But yeah, there were a few songs there, and I think Forefront, you know, heard this opportunity to push the hip hop element within, you know, the industry of Christian music that really hadn't happened yet, and especially an interracial group, because, you know, that was quite a story too, that, you know, there were 2 white dudes and a black dude together making music, I guess was kind of special at that point, you know?
Well, yeah, especially if you think of from Liberty, and Liberty, like a whole bunch of other schools that are formed out of white evangelicals' response to integration and things, you know, some more explicitly than others. But I remember the first time being told about DC Talk was, as an example, at a youth gathering for racial reconciliation, right? And they're like, "Look at this cool tape," and so
that wouldn't have come out of Bob Jones.
You know? No, right, exactly.
It just wouldn't have happened, you know.
No, yeah. It would have gotten completely banned there. But so when you think of like going back to school and then forming a group where it takes off fast, and then all of a sudden you're at your vocation or singing these songs to thousands and thousands of people, like what is it like as an artist, but also an artist where there's faith connected to it, to then have to ask your own questions and process your own faith when each night there are thousands of people singing along to songs and, you know, hearing them from their own location and things?
Yeah. I mean, again, it's like, I go back to, it was not as important to me to be diving deep into what we were saying as much as it was a performance thing. And because I was young, and of course I knew what we were talking about. But the majority of those songs from the early 2 or 3 records were Toby writing a lot of his thoughts. And he's actually 4 years older than me, or 3 years older than me. And, you know, he had his ideas pretty well fleshed out before the group became, you know, what it was. And here I am, just kind of like, you know, in my weird poetry stages, trying to figure out who I was. And I was a bit along for the ride, if you will, but I agreed with the majority of what he was saying. So to me, I didn't question a lot of it. It was more about the performance to me, and making sure that people were entertained and happy. And it was great. It wasn't until later on that I started really digging in and going, okay, what are we saying here? And why are we saying these things? And, you know, moving really quickly forward to right now. I mean, over the last couple of years, I've deconstructed / reconstructed quite heavily and progressively. So it's it's interesting to look back on those times because, yeah, I mean, there was a lot of innocence there, and there was definitely a lot of pure ideas, hey, this is cool. I like to think the best song ever written by DC Talk was probably What If I Stumble, because it was, talking about our own humanity and we didn't have the answers.
Yeah.
Being able to hang out with Brennan Manning was another huge deal because, his, teaching us behind the scenes about his worldview was just amazing. I mean, it completely shifted our thought patterns, I think, from Free at Last album to Jesus Freak. Lots of growth between those two records, but, a little bit of growth every time between, the self-titled to New Thing to Free at Last. But I don't think we really found out who we were until probably end of Free at Last, beginning of Jesus Freak as a group,
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. And I know just from doing the podcast that that same type of period of life is where lots of ministers struggle, right? Like whatever, you don't pick your family is and what expression of a religious tradition you're born into. And if you connect to it in some way, say you're a good public speaker, a good musician, or you're really good at helping people feel welcomed at your youth group, and they say you should be a leader. There's so many ways you can lean into using your gifts in ways that bless people, give them joy, help them through struggles, all sorts of things. And then you're like 28 and you're like, but why are we born to suffer and die? And then they look at you and they're like, can't you just sing the song I want? Or that's not a resurrection sermon, Trip. Like, this is Easter, not a time to go, but perhaps, I feel like that, for some reason, every other human other than leaders gets to have their own questions and doubts and struggles, but somehow there's this pressure that gets put on a lot of times ministers and definitely like figures like yourself, and definitely in CCM. I've heard this from multiple different CCM artists I've talked to at different points, where there's this like dynamic that makes the whole struggle different because you see how people see you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll give you an absolute example of what I'm dealing with right now, actually. And I don't want to bring us right up to the Larry Norman project, but I'll just say, when we became friends with Larry back in the mid 90s, and he would come along and do shows with us because we were covering I Wish We'd All Been Ready, which I can't even remember who decided to cover that. I don't think it was me because I never really made the decisions in the band. I was kind of like the dumb blonde singer that just, sang my harmonies. But at some point we started covering that song, and Larry came out and did a few shows with us. And then I actually became personal friends with Larry. We kept in touch, and he would come through Nashville, and, this was literally a year after we kind of decided to take a break from the band, and I was working on my first solo album, Stereotype B. He came into town, and my producer was Adrian Ballou, and we were hanging out that evening. And I said, hey, my friend Larry Norman's in town. I'd really love you to meet Larry, Adrian. And I just wanted to get Adrian Ballou and Larry Norman in a room together, And so we had a dinner and talked about a bunch of stuff, and it was just amazing. And he ended up singing a couple of songs on my first record, Larry did. And, during that time period, I just heard all these personal stories from Larry about how he struggled about some of the things that he wrote. And that was one of the songs that he struggled with. Now, zipping forward to last year when I released Revisiting This Planet, I have a huge problem with I Wish We'd All Been Ready, theologically, philosophically, whatever. I mean, I don't believe in the rapture. So it was really hard for me to.
Well, neither does the New Testament, Kevin. You're in good company.
Right. So, I thought, okay, I'm going to exclude this song from the record, but I knew that I would make a lot of purists angry, so that I put it on the vinyl. But long story short is that I revisited my past by doing this record and thought how many nights I sat there on stage singing I Wish We'd All Been Ready and really into the moment and not really thinking about the random theology, of the rapture. I mean, it just never really clicked with me. It was more like a dystopian, fairy tale to me. And I would just, think, wow, how weird would it be if that actually really happened, as opposed to it's not going to happen. I mean, so, it's just interesting how we progress and we grow. And I said yesterday on Twitter, we progress or we die inside, and I think as a 53-year-old man, I've progressed pretty quickly over the last couple of years, but I've always been progressing. And people are like, when did you start your deconstruction? I've been deconstructing, I don't know, from maybe the mid 80s. Who knows? I mean,
yeah.
The minute I left my parents' house, I deconstructed pretty hard, I guess,
Well, and I think that story with Larry makes a lot of sense. And every artist has to decide what their relationship is with, their previous work. And then what do you do with it? This March will be the 15th anniversary of the podcast. And I regularly get emails from like me saying something in the first 500 episodes and not the last 500. And someone's like, but you said this, but what about this? And I'm like, I don't know. I guess I changed my mind. Thanks for letting me know, and with Larry, like I saw him every time he played east of the Mississippi, basically from like 96 on. It was like my grandmother and I's thing to drive to every Larry Norman concert. If he's on this side of, the east side of the Mississippi, and we became friends with him. And, he's like one of the kindest people. And he hinted at something like that, but now that you say it, on Only Today That Counts, before he regularly introduces a song, he talks about growing up as a Christian, and especially in the premillennial dispensationalist thing, but he didn't name that specifically, where the primary image of God was his judge. And there's and coming to recognize that the loving father image was what Jesus held most dear and passed on. He has a line, I didn't know you were my father. I thought you were the hanging judge. And when I came into your courtroom, I thought you'd hold a grudge. Right. And that the story says breakthrough moment. And he said, don't let anyone, when you come to see God as full of more love than anticipated, don't let anyone tell you you're a heretic. And I just remember, when he shared that, it was, it was real encouraging for me as someone who grew up in the South, and there's always that peer pressure to perform kind of, expectation.
Well, that's the thing about Larry that was kind of a thing that only like his really close friends knew, that, I think that he progressed quite a bit during his life. Only visiting this planet, it seems a bit conservative in parts, because he's talking about specific things that are what the conservatives rail about today. But he's also pointing a finger at the Nixon administration, and he's talking about, civil rights. And there's a lot of wonderful subject material on that record. And I just thought, I'd made a protest album on July 3rd, right in the middle of the, pandemic, called Radio Technica. And if your listeners are interested, just put that one on with a lava lamp and, just kind of chill with that. It's a spoken word record. And it's kind of, me on the soapbox for the first time, kind of talking about what I truly believe in when it comes to politics and things. So I made my statement, and strangely enough, I knew that I had to finish this Larry Norman record because it was a project that I had started before that. And it was just so weird to go from Radio Technica, which was me, talking about, being against all these things that the Trump administration were about. And then like recording this record, about Larry Norman, and his subject material was all, 1972. But it was interesting, even though they were bookends for me, there was a lot of connective tissue there with what he was saying and what I'm all about right now. And, George Floyd happened, right before all of that. And it just really kind of informed my process in making this record, and especially A Great American Novel. The song lyrically was just like so relevant to what was happening in that moment as I'm performing this record and realizing, oh my God, he did this in 1971. And we still haven't changed. We're still dealing with these monstrous, heinous issues of not treating people equally. It's quite sad. and I'm ready for the aliens to come get me. Okay.
Well, I thought Radio Technica was great, and like if people haven't heard it, you could just go check it out. But if you just scroll through the titles of the tracks, there's a number of them, right? That just you weren't hiding the content, you could say, right? Jesus, I love you, but your followers freak me out. The none of the above, but the song that Dance Like a Socialist, high quality tune. The song that struck me the most on the album was None of the Above. And, I take when I listen to new albums for the first time, I come up with like little mini rituals. It used to be like opening the CD case and sniffing it because I always thought they smelled cool. And
they do smell cool. Yeah.
And then sitting in your car because you had to drive somewhere to get it. And now they're just like on your phone. So now I wait to listen to new albums. Well, before lockdown, when I'm on the bus by myself and I put in the nice headphones, there's no kids, and just listen straight through. So when I was taking the bus into the University of Edinburgh listening, and I'm looking at the track titles, and None of the Above struck me. And then the song that definitely tackled some of the things that stuck about it, and that how many times our options were given are just problematic, right? Like if you ask a shitty question and give us a list of poor options, the correct response is none of the above, and it's not because you hate truth, goodness, Jesus, love, and any of that. It's just bad question, worse answers.
Well, I talked about it the other day with my guitar player. I mean, think about it. Who would really want the job of a president? Anybody that really wants that job is absolutely suspect at best, And so, well, None of the Above was the most musical song on that track, that album too. I mean, this was a spoken word record. I've done a couple before this, and so people are always kind of scratching their heads like, well, if you've got this voice that everybody knows you from as a singer, why are you doing spoken word records? And I've always loved poetry. It's always been a part of what's informed me as a songwriter too. And once in a while I get this strange wild hair that tickles me and says, you need to make a spoken word record, and then I lose half the fans that I've already lost, half of those fans. And then I'm down to a couple hundred people now, but we'll see.
Well, maybe we can get you back to 4 digits. There are a couple questions people sent in from like that were DC Talk related. So I want to ask those before we jump too far ahead. And one of them that I definitely liked was, what is your favorite story to tell about touring craziness?
Yeah. Wow. I mean, as somebody that's been on a tour bus for decades, that's a tough one because there's so many. Just off the top of my head, just kind of arguments that we would have on the bus that would get so heated that would turn into wrestling matches, and the bus would be rocking back and forth, and people standing outside, either ready to take us to the hall for a sound check or whatever, could hear the shouting voices and things running about, and they always thought, wow, this is not the picture of DC Talk that we thought. I would say the most precarious ones were when we would always go over the border to Canada. The bus was always searched quite rigorously. Even back then, it was searched, for cannabis or whatever. I mean, they saw a band and they immediately thought, oh, they're all about the sweet leaf, So,
and which one of you was more suspect? Was it like
salty leaf? Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I mean, there was a couple of times where we had, crew guys that were detained, and some didn't even make it back over the border. So those were always interesting times. You kind of found out what people were hiding, and a couple of them actually had rap sheets, not like actual hip hop rap, but like actual criminal rap sheets, and we didn't know. So those stories were always interesting. I'm sorry that I don't have a particular one that sets out in my mind, but we had many, many, many hilarious scenarios that happened as the three of us. And it was never just the three of us. It was because we had a huge band that backed us up. We had dancers at the very beginning days. We had Teron and Stacy, who were absolutely hilarious people. With their own backgrounds and their own stories, and it was absolutely an interracial, just stew pot of individuals, and you couldn't get a more diverse group of people in one bus than the DC Talk early days. It was just amazing.
Got it.
I got to tell you this story because I'm looking at my image that I can barely see myself. It's a little tiny one. And I'm remembering right now, no kidding, this just splashed in my brain. The last time that I did a gig in England, I think, well, maybe it wasn't the last time, second to the last time. I was in Arundel, right? And Jonathan Brown of Fierce Distribution, he was the manager for Delirious and a bunch of other stuff. He worked my third record there, and so I came over, and we ended up doing a bunch of shows, you know, all around the UK, and then a couple in Germany, a couple in the Netherlands, and then we came back over. And so we ended up in Arundel, and I was in Arundel for about 3 days before I flew back home. And so he goes, man, we got to go to this pub that's, you know, just about 20 minutes away from another village. It's so great. You're going to love it. It's really old school. I'm like, okay, great. Let's go. And it had karaoke. So it was karaoke night, which is, that's my jam, man. If you get me on a karaoke stage, things happen. Like, really, it's mystical. Stuff happens, you know?
Oh,
and
that's what I like to hear.
So it's just me and Jonathan Brown in this pub, and it's crowded. It's packed, right? And the bar is just packed with people, and everybody's in chairs. It's all packed. And I go up and I sing Frank Sinatra, My Way, right? And people are freaking out. People are like, you know, it was talking and stuff before I got up there. Then when I started singing, everybody was silent. It was just, you could hear a pin drop. And two things happened. Near the very end of the song, they started chanting this thing. And I couldn't really hear what they were saying because it was like, because I'm on stage and I can't, the song is ending and I don't know what they're saying, right? I hear this chanting, and then I look at the bar, and there is a literal line of shots lined up. And it was intended for me, right? So they had lined up, all these people are like, we're getting him a shot. He gets a shot, you know, so I had all these shots lined up. And then I'm walking to John Brown's like, they want you to have these drinks. And as I'm walking over to the drinks, I realize what they're saying. They're chanting D'Artagnan. D'Artagnan, D'Artagnan. And it was because I had a big handlebar mustache, you know, hair about to here.
That's amazing.
And I was D'Artagnan, you know, that could sing, I guess, you know, and it was like, it was just the most amazing night because then I had probably 4 or 5 of those shots. I don't know how many I had. Went back to this little tiny hotel in Arundel, which was, you know, probably like a 1700s building. It was a really, really old building. And I remember waking up about 3 or 4 in the morning and like I was hearing these noises. It was so weird. And I looked and there was a reflection on the TV. And this is where it gets weird. I swear to you, it looked like a leprechaun dancing in my TV. Like it was just like, you know, it was like this really strange little green, you know, guy with a cap like yours and, you know, a beard and like dancing around and like little sparkly things happen. I'm thinking like, is my TV on? Is this like a cartoon or something? And the TV wasn't on. And I was thinking my mind, maybe because I had, you know, had too much to drink.
Did the leprechaun call you D'Artagnan?
That's what I was hoping for. It never happened.
Oh,
I just kind of and then this little ghostly, strange apparition moved around the room and then disappeared. And it was the weirdest. And I never even told Jonathan Brown about it because I didn't want him to think, man, this guy can't hold his liquor, you know?
Yeah, the Europeans, when Americans come over, they're like, oh, it'll ruin your witness to Europeans if you don't know how to hold your liquor.
You got to hold
America, you get in trouble for the brown juice.
Yeah.
The dark water.
Black water. Which is, oh man, it's so insane. It's so insane. But yeah, so, you know, that was probably the second to the last time I was over there. I went back over again about a couple of years or 3 years before now. I did something over there, just a little tiny gig, but that and then, you know, I had done some shows, you know, DC Talk, we had been over there quite a bit. But it's always been my dream to, like, you know, catch big somewhere in Europe. And I want it to be somewhere strange, you know, like Prague or something. Like I get this underground hit in Prague and I have to go, you know, play the caves of Prague somewhere and become this huge Prague superstar. That's my dream, you know.
I mean, there were worse things. What was it like when the crowds like tripled in size, right? Because I remember just thinking of seeing y'all in concerts with my youth group. I remember seeing you and there's like, you know, 1,200 people at a college. And then 6 months later, you're like with Billy Graham and these type of that big shift. Because, you know, y'all were friends. And then, and
just so your listeners know, I've never done a Franklin Graham show, so that's something I'm kind of, you know, I would say I'm proud of the fact that he's so different from his father that it's scary. He's
Billy probably Graham, being haunted.
The Billy Graham stuff was interesting because I don't know who gave our name to Billy Graham to be an opening act or whatever. It was kind of interesting. You know, he had Johnny Cash on the road with him for a while, you know, so he had these interesting characters, but all of a sudden, you know, DC Talk were literally opening for Billy Graham in front of like 60,000 people in these stadiums. And it was just mind blowing. Like I literally sat back in the chair after the concert and was just like, I didn't even know what was happening. I was just like, wow, what is this? You know? So I forgot your question.
Oh, no, just like, what is it like? You know, you're a group of friends starting a band, and then, you know, in less than a year, things explode. Like, what's going on the inside when that's happening? Because I think a lot of people, anyone that's an artist and makes something and puts it out there, wants that to happen, but very few people experience what the explosion's like. Yeah,
I mean, and this is an answer that probably a lot of people won't like, but it's just the truth. Is that we had started. You know, really early on in 1988 or 89 performing. And it was like almost immediate, like these crowds really got what we were doing and got excited. I mean, with the very first tours that we took with DeGarmo and Key as an opening act, we kind of won their crowd over overnight. I don't say overnight, but like, you know, midway through the tour, they were chanting DC Talk into the second song of the DeGarmo and Key set. So I think it was just because we were so odd and we put on this crazy show that people were like, oh man, it was a trajectory that just kept climbing and climbing and climbing initially. And so it wasn't like an overnight, like we were playing in front of 50 people and then all of a sudden we're playing in front of 50,000. It was a very quick ascension, if you will. But yeah, I mean, there was definitely those moments where I'd look out over, you know, the stadium of people and just think, wow. But then also there's a part of you that has been there from the very beginning and realizes that that was like a normal progression for us. So it was stymieing, and yet it was also kind of normal, which was really strange to say. I would say it's kind of like a U2 scenario where, you know, they just kind of caught on pretty quickly with people, and before you knew it, we're going from clubs to stadiums. And I think that has a lot to do with music being heard through radio or whatever, where people are being introduced to it in mass. Because, you know, had we not had radio songs that were being played on radio, that would have never happened. I mean, all of my favorite bands are the bands that never had radio songs, that were, you know, kind of like on the sidelines and making alternative music. You know, you never heard those bands on radio, and that's why they didn't go from the clubs to the stadiums. But unfortunately, the stadium gives way to bands like Creed and whatever, that it is a part of the deal. If you're popular on radio, that also might ruin your career, you know? And I think we stayed out of that because of the inclusion in the musical ghetto of Christian music, if you will. when we signed with Virgin in 1997, 96, 97, 98, somewhere around there, there were a couple of songs that were on MTV and went up the charts and did some things, but never, hugely successful in the general market. Or I think we would have gone even further,
So what was you talked about from kind of Jesus Freak into Supernatural and stuff, the songwriting process changing? Because early on, you said Toby had a clear vision of what he was up to and that type of thing. But I think when people think of that shifted in Jesus Freak, all of a sudden you had the coolest beginning of a rock song that a Christian had ever stood on stage for. Like when the Jesus Freak song starts, you're like, oh, is this allowed? I just remember thinking it, going like, it's like you listen to Christian music if you're at youth group, but then when you're not, you'd rather listen to Nirvana and Stone Temple Pilots. And then all of a sudden that song comes on and you're like, hey, they have a real distortion pedal and it sounds cool. Right. And so like what was the kind of musical shift that went through there?
Well, I mean, Jesus Freak it led the record before any other song. Toby had written that with Mark Heimerman, and they were playing around with that sound pre-finishing, even the first couple of songs on that album. And we previewed that song. It was either in Australia or South Africa for the first time, and people went crazy, and they'd never heard the song before. And so it was just kind of like, oh, wow. And so we ended up opening the set with that song and closing the set with that song because people loved it so much. And we would just go crazy on stage where everybody would just be shoving each other. And it became like this chaotic moment where it all breaks down and goes crazy. And I think that was indicative of what was happening in the music scene at that time. I mean, grunge came along and just destroyed all the hair metal bands, all the crappy pop music. It just kind of took over, right? So we were definitely. I have to throw this to Toby because he wrote the song, but I'm sure he was influenced by it. But people always say, "Oh, it's such a Nirvana ripoff." Well, yeah, maybe, but the rest of the record wasn't like that at all. And the album itself had so many different bits and pieces to it. Between You and Me was actually was the biggest single on the record. I mean, that got played on radio and MTV and whatever. Jesus Freak then became, swallowed up by the rest of the album, but obviously was always that song that stuck out from the very beginning, never kind of went away. It's become, infamous or whatever. But yeah, when we first started performing it and singing it and playing it, we knew we had something interesting because the initial response was so huge that it changed the trajectory of the set. Now it was like, we got to push rock and roll because rock and roll is really, what people are interested in right now. And, Like It, Love It, Need It, and Day by Day and other songs like that were kind of pushed more harder edged in rock and roll than the rest of the stuff. But
and you were ready to sing more.
I was singing. Well, we were all singing pretty, even more so in the live sets. Michael and I, really took over in the live performances because, Toby was rapping half the song.
Right.
The other half started, the process of becoming more and more, musical singing melodies. It really shifted from New Thing to Free at Last to becoming more of a musical element than just hip hop. And hip hop is music, so I'm sorry, this is all subjective. But yeah, Jesus Freak was the first time that we all wrote together as a band and not just three guys. I brought that up to Toby and I just said, I really feel like the three of us need to be writing more. I need to be writing more. Or I'm gonna start a solo album really quickly. And at that time, strangely enough, 1994. Before Jesus Freak, I had done this poetry book with Jimmy Abegg, who was the guitar player for Charlie Peacock. And we made this weird poetry book together. And the guys were going, what are you doing? I mean, are you going to become a solo artist? And I'm like, well, no, I've got all these thoughts and ideas and songs in me that I'm not really able to do with DC Talk. So I've got to put them out somehow. I had to have another extension to throw out my ideas. And that was At the Foot of Heaven. And it continued into Jesus Freak. Hey, I need to write. And then like Supernatural, all three of us wrote on every song. So I always tell people, I feel like Supernatural is the most pure DC Talk album because the three of us are on every tune and our influences on every tune. So
yeah. No, I mean, that makes sense. So which is what's your favorite song to sing when you see it on a set list?
With DC Talk or me? Oh, it's
in
DC
general,
Talk.
Or you could do both.
Oh yeah, for DC Talk, man, it's tough because some of the songs on albums don't really equate to live performances well. Like I love My Friend So Long. It's one of my favorite songs. It's a challenging one live. We pull it off, but it's challenging. Mind's Eye, which isn't actually one of my favorite DC Talk songs on an album, is one of my favorite songs live. It's a really great song to perform live. So I would say, What If I Stumble, The Hard Way, My Friend So Long. Those are my favorite DC Talk songs, really. Jesus Freak gives me the anxiety because I've done it so much that, I start to go, oh, not this song again. And then, midway through the tune, I'm like, okay, this is pretty fun. And then when somebody smashes into you and makes your microphone chip your tooth, then you're back to like, like feeling you're a punk rocker, but not really because you're in a CCM band. But
every time I saw Jesus Freak live, I just thought y'all have the coolest bass player he starts jumping and I can't, what's his name?
Otto Price.
Yeah, he's a great bass player.
Sugar Bear, and he actually likes the nickname Sugar Bear and goes by it sometimes. I hung out with him recently, and he'll tell people just call me Sugar Bear, and I'm like, wow. I mean, you go with it, In the Sad Astronauts, my name is Flash E. Shepherd. We took astronaut names, and Eric Cole, my guitar player, is Buzz E. Grissom. So we're buzzy and flashy, and I kind of like not having to be Kevin Max. So I get, Otto Price being a caricature and being cool with it. But he was honestly one of the most captivating band members we ever had. Mm-hmm. So much charisma on stage. Also just a crazy good player. Through our career, we've had some of the best session players on stage with us that ever came out of Nashville, and LA. So he's cool, and he's a good friend of mine too.
Back to the Larry Norman thing. I remember seeing him play before y'all at, I think it was Creation Festival. And you think of like the main stage bands are all like full bands. And then it's like, right before y'all, Larry Norman comes out with just his guitar. And it was the most Larry Norman thing, because they do their, they're trying to get people to sponsor children, overseas for Compassion International. And Larry comes out and plays the song, You Got to Feed the Poor, which is like half the lyrics of the song. You have to feed the poor, you must obey. If Jesus asked you if you fed the poor, what are you going to say? He plays it and keeps playing guitar for a second. He goes, well, I think I might need to sing this again. Now, if anyone out here doesn't think that if they're going to go buy one of these DC Talk shirts and not sponsor a kid, you should stop at the prayer tent and then maybe go over the compassion tent. And I think the boys would be fine if you just opt for feeding somebody.
Yes.
And then he plays it again. And a couple times in the concert, he's like, I'm just going to play this verse one more time. If you're listening to the Holy Spirit, he did stuff like that in concert. And
thank God for Larry Norman, absolutely. I mean, we backed that 100%. We're like, absolutely. I mean, being the son of a hippie, I'm, whenever I see a true hippie on stage, it makes me smile. I love the idea of anybody taking the hippie trajectory is cool with me.
Mm-hmm. You said earlier that there's a certain type of freedom that comes, post DC Talk and exploring different types of albums, different types of music, but be it the Larry cover album, new stuff with Sad Astronaut, spoken word, and all that kind of thing. And then in that process, the last few years, your kind of process of faith transformation intensified and sped up. Was there a particular moment, question, where like the lingering doubts, thoughts, and ideas like coalesced, and you knew that you had kind of, a spiritual task before you to kind of wrestle with it?
There was a lot of wrestling in the latter days of DC Talk, but it was mainly wrestling with the idea of the industry and, the selling of Jesus through music and merchandise and whatever. I was never really into that. And my rebellion against that came out in humor on stage or saying things at award shows that, people kind of, clinched when I got on stage because they were like, oh man, he's going to say something crazy. That was my way of saying I didn't agree with it. And, from a spiritual standpoint, I was constantly progressing, looking into different, authors and from Henry Nouwen to, Brennan Manning to, jumping into actually Swedenborgian stuff, I was really reading a lot and just kind of questioning a lot of things. But I was also pretty silent about it because it was really difficult for me to speak, from that place of DC Talk where it was primarily already, a thing that Toby had set in stone. And I wanted to, respect that. And so the interesting thing about DC Talk is I feel like now in the social media, we're kind of used as this example. Oh, people made us go to DC Talk shows, youth pastors made us go see them. Oh, these songs that we had to sing, the theology is horrible. I feel like the last two albums that DC Talk made, though, were actually really wonderful. And I don't have much against what was going on for the last couple albums, and I'm proud of them. You know what I mean? The earlier stuff, I'm not saying I'm not proud of it. There's some things I don't totally agree with, but I'm now for the first time speaking about it, and it's weird, because I'm 53. Yeah. I'm free now. I'm free at last.
Well, thank God Almighty.
But we're still doing shows together, possibly, in the near future, and so I've got to respect that there's two other guys in the band, and they might not necessarily agree with me 100%. But that's the story of brotherhood, man. Is that we all kind of grow together, and even though we have differences, we try to we try to love each other at the end of the day. I mean, Michael Tate and I couldn't be more different politically. I mean, we are absolutely opposed politically. And yet I talk to him more than I do Toby. And he gives me his rant and I give him my rant. And at the end of the conversation, I'm like, all right, well, I still love you, bro. I got to go. And it's,
I think that's really important, right? Like if we only kept the friends that kept agreeing with us, then that's a real sad world.
Yes.
And so like, what is it, when you think about the big questions that you've kind of wrestled and shifted on and are, learning to process and think out loud about, or, publicly about, which ones have been like the easiest ones for you to be public about changing your mind on, and which ones were like harder or more costly or, had a bigger impact on you emotionally or personally?
Well, the easier ones are organized religion, and we played a lot of these big mega churches throughout the years, and even back then, going into a big mega church and kind of seeing how they did things gave me the heebie-jeebies. And so that's a real easy one for me to just kind of say, I've walked away from that big time, and I've never was really a part of any of it, but I never really agreed with it. And I really don't go to a specific church anymore. And so, when people hear that, they're like, do you go to church? I'm like, no. But then again, it's not a weird thing because we're in a pandemic. So there's a big reason why a lot of us don't go to church, and we don't want to be super spreaders, right? But I don't.
and sometimes when you get together with people, the church are not just spreading coronavirus.
Yes.
You can be spreading other contagious.
They're spreading contagious theologies that we don't want to be a part of. Yeah, I mean, so I'm in an interesting spot where I'm just starting to talk about this for the first time, because it's been more important to me to make music, to make art, than it is to get on a soapbox and talk about my politics and whatnot. But, you know, a friend of mine online on Twitter, David Dark, has really kind of pushed me to, you know, realize, you know, everything is political, you know? And so when you open your mouth, it's political, whether you think it is or not. And so I've really embraced that now. And I'm like, yeah, let me talk about that. You know, so that's an easy one. One of the hardest things to me is, you know, the inerrancy of scripture and whatever. And I talk about it in Sad Astronauts on a song called It's Okay. And I basically break down that, you know, I'm struggling with the idea of that. It's going to be interesting what kind of backlash happens when I, you know, speak about these things. But I truly am at this place where I'm like looking at everything from the scripture to, you know, whatever, the Book of Enoch and tablets that were found here and there, and just going, okay, what is 100% accurate and what isn't, you know? And a friend of mine, you know, will call the Bible the Church of Constantine, you know, and I'm kind of like, I don't know if I'm there yet, but I'm certainly getting up to that door. And so, yeah, that's a big one, because when you start to say, I'm not sure about the whole thing, then you're opening up a huge wormhole of, you know, people, you know, disagreeing or disliking, or, you know, I'm not afraid of it though. I'm on my journey, and I still believe 100% in a God that is in control. And I do believe in Jesus Christ and his messages and I keep going back to Christ and his ultimate example. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I feel it's really funny when people try to put him over on the side of Republicans and the GOP. And I'm like, nah, he's definitely more socialist, you know, and then we get in these huge arguments. I think it's really important for people to look into what Jesus was about. Not only about what he said, but how he lived his life, mm-hmm. you know, as an example. So I guess I'm just unraveling day by day. Not to quote one of my songs, but
you know, one of the things I think shows up repeatedly when talking to people that come out of, you know, the type of evangelicalism that's culture dominant in like places like Liberty and such, is it the notion of biblical inerrancy, things like that, or that the church is obviously a steward of the nation state and capitalism, and that's its job, right? Like those type of things are so just assumed that then you read Jesus say, blessed are the peacemakers. And you're like, yeah, isn't that one of the names of our missiles that we used in Iraq? Like there's a peacemaker missile, you know, in these type of things that, you know, to me, one of the greatest gifts people that grew up in that space and people that trust them give isn't like your answers, but permission to ask those questions. Because it's not like if you read the scriptures, the story of Jesus isn't compelling in and of itself, regardless of like your understanding of inspiration and how that works out. And I found out like my family weren't fundamentalists in that sense and weren't inerrantists. And when I went to school and met Baptists that were, I was like, you do know that's like a new doctrine, right? For most of church history, that's not even how they understood biblical authority. And you would meet people like, no, every Christian believes this. I'm like, actually, the Catholic Church doesn't. And they were the only option for a long time. You know, it's you know, sometimes I think it's that fear of like acknowledging the doubts and questions that's the hardest leap, because like you said, like I still trust that God's present in this and that the love that you see in Christ is there. If that's there, then what's really to be scared of? It's the relationships, it's these ideas that you inherited that you don't know how to renegotiate the relationship with.
Yes. And so the idea of an ultimate loving God is definitely more in line with, you know, what I'm about. You know, I talk about how I'm a universalist. Everybody is of the universe. I feel like the more that we try to put an answer on every topic, the further away we get from finding things out. And the more questions we ask, the better we are. And so I feel like I attribute a lot of the stuff that happens throughout time and through humanity as human error. And it's crazy sad to me that we're still in this place that we are of not treating people equal, not loving people, better than ourselves, not putting people in front of ourselves, not taking care of the poor, not worrying about, is there people in our country itself? Are there people in America that aren't getting food, that aren't being sheltered? And those are the important topics to me that seem to be glossed over in favor of, people arguing over theology and what side you take in a presidential race. And, I need to have my guns, I need to be able to say no to abortion. I need to be able, and it takes precedent over actually caring for people.
Well, I would act like Jesus, Kevin, but sometimes acting like Jesus is problematic if you're trying to keep the true doctrine. So sometimes doctrine gets in the way.
Can I get a witness?
Yeah. One of the things I think that, at least for me, my wife and I are both ordained ministers. And when we found out we were going to have our first kid, recognizing just the power of the spiritual and religious kind of water your children's born into, all of a sudden we realized, we could be in congregations and they tolerate our perspectives. That's real different than the one you raise your kid in. And so once we were like, we're having a kid, we didn't want to work at churches where we debated if everyone was welcome or if you should care for the planet. And we didn't want justice to be an elective for certain Christians at the church, but something we were all invested in. And it wasn't until I framed it in that way, what do you just want the background hum when Jesus comes up and the church is to be communicated? And it's amazing how few churches that is. It's not hard. I'm not saying every Christian has to believe this, but if you want to say something like, when you talk about God as a Christian, God should at least be as nice as Jesus, right? He was still human. So it had to be some limits there because he could only be in one place one time. God should at least be as nice as Jesus. And we should probably be in a community that makes the earth hospitable to life 3 generations from now. Not huge, but the number of churches where you can't just assume those ideas are shaping the heart of the community. Instead, they're things you debate and maybe we'll have conversations about, or even worse, kick them out. I think that's a real challenge for lots of people who grew up and encountered God in the church, but then recognize that the teachings and vision of Jesus conflicts with the heart of so many congregations.
Absolutely. And I feel like that's why there's a mass exodus happening right now. Definitely in America. I'm not sure what's happening in Scotland as much as, I obviously see what's happening here, but this, I'd say movement of people that are wanting to invest more in the character of Christ and less in following these cultish leaders is growing in huge numbers. And and so I wanted to say something real quick. I feel like my whole thing is informed by the fact that I was adopted. I was adopted as a baby. And Max and Elaine Smith of Grand Rapids, Michigan adopted me, and they were, I would say, I hate to put titles on things, but they were more of the conservative, evangelical type. And I grew up in that scenario. Now, my birth father is a hippie who's amazing. I say he's a hippie. He's probably not. I don't know if he relates to that anymore. But he was in a band in the '60s and made rock and roll and grew his hair out long and was into Buddhism and everything. And I feel like I get both of those in my life now. I didn't have that growing up until I realized who my birth parents were. But I see this, from two different sides all the time. Because of my upbringing, I'm informed by that. But I ultimately look at my parents who adopted me and showed me love and brought me up in a wonderful home as really wonderful examples of Christ. You know what I mean? And yes, I might not agree with everything they agree with from a you know, a theological standpoint, a political standpoint, but they loved me, you know, and so I've had it pretty good. And even though I wrestle with everything, I've been showed a lot of love. So I can't complain. And I've had a really wonderful life. And now, because of that full circle of different sides, I feel like I'm better equipped as a dad to give my kids a well-rounded look at what's going on, you know? Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. I have that microcosm of different types of people in my family. I've got one kid that's very, you know, he could possibly someday maybe be a pastor. I don't know. And then I've got a daughter that's like an activist, you know what I mean? And, you know, so I have the spectrum within my 4 kids there. And I feel like, I don't want to try to sound like a hippie here, but I feel like it's all about the independent individual journey, and none of us can really like fault another person. So when I'm online and somebody comes after me for being a leftist, you know, I'm just like, well, you know, they're on their own journey, and maybe one day they'll change, and their ideas will change, and they will progress, you know. So I try not to be too hard on people, but yeah, I have canceled a few of them and pushed the block button here and there. And I ultimately
the mute button.
Or the mute button. Mute's
because then
nice
they don't know about it, and so it's not personal to them. It just makes your feed a lot more sane.
Yes. I find myself more at home at Twitter than anywhere else. Like, you know, Facebook seems to be, you know, so delusional. Instagram seems to be ultimately narcissistic. But Twitter seems to be a place of great communication and debate. I don't know why that is. I think everybody finds their own kind of social media avenue.
Which one fits your personality and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I know I had a friend that ran a study correlating your time use of different social media apps to your Myers-Briggs personalities. And like there's strong correlations between different ones. The thing I like about Twitter is if you have multiple children, sometimes the only time you get to play around on the internet while they're awake is if you pretend you're taking a dump. And when you're sitting on the toilet, it's not the time to post a picture on Instagram, but you can definitely tweet, you know, edgy, nerdy things.
Yes. I'll just say yes.
Yes. Obviously, Kevin never does that. Just me. You said earlier that your kind of spiritual journey has gotten more cosmic. And then, you know, you threw the hint out. As someone who ran an online reading group and done events called the Cosmic Campfire, now I want to hear you talk about it, so that if ever we're allowed together again in person, I can message you back and like, don't you want to come do cosmic group sing-alongs at the Cosmic Campfire? Because usually the speakers are all like spiritually centered scientists and philosophers of religion. So it's a nerdy gathering.
Well, I mean, I'll just say real quickly, the top, and this might go off topic from what you were expecting, but I will say that I'm really interested in alien life, and I feel like we're starting to see black holes as being possible doorways into other dimensions. I think that stuff has always been there. I think we're just finally catching up, and I think, you know, maybe 100 years from now, we will be hanging on other planets and communing with other species and races, and I like to look at the future as being kind of like utopia, where we finally get to understand how debased we are as human beings, and we start to learn that it is all about loving each other equally, regardless of our differences, and holding another being up respectfully as we would respect our own children, and not expecting the aliens to be, you know, violent or against us, but, you know, wanting to commune with us, you know what I mean? So I've got this happy hippie utopian idea of the future in my mind, you know. Maybe John Lennon wasn't totally wrong about saying, imagine there's no countries and there's no, you know, lines of delineation anymore. Maybe Scotland and England can just kind of morph into France, you know, and it's all just like one.
Scotland was more than happy to go hang out with France as long as England's not going. That's their. So when you say that, like, one of the things about the role extraterrestrials have played across different cultures is a way of rethinking encounters of difference differently, right? So if you think of how Christianity has encountered difference throughout its history, it's usually come with some empire expanding. And so one of the things I love about like using alien and extraterrestrial encounters and stuff as a kind of a theological sandbox of sorts is that you do get to think about encountering the other and not, also bringing the Constantinian agenda with you. Like, what would that look like? And if the church had not been so compliant with the domination systems that we've rode on the backs of as a church, then there would be a whole lot less things to apologize for, there would be less contrast. So I think I find it so helpful to use the what if of encountering a new species to then go, what would it mean for us to be informed by enemy loving care to show up to difference in a new way? Like, what Absolutely. Would we do differently?
Well, it's interesting. I wrote a book a few years back called Fiefdom of Angels, and it was my idea of, what was the angelic race like before the creation of planet Earth, Terra One is what I call it. And what's interesting, the book of Enoch and, reading a lot of these passages about angels and the angelic race. What's wrong with thinking that this is possibly another word for alien? They're light beings. They're showing up and saying, "Be not afraid." It's obviously there's something going on there beyond, a cute chubby cherub. There's intelligence there. And so that made my mind go crazy. And so I created this world, and in that world, it was these beings struggling with the fact that they knew that God was creating another race of being called the human, but the majority of them were cool with that. They were happy about it. It was the small minority of, the ISIS types that were like, we can't have that. We've got to destroy them. And we've got to destroy now the creator because of that. And it kind of circles around to the age-old story of Lucifer and the rebellion and all that and whatnot. So it's very intriguing to me, the thought of other alien life beyond our own humanity.
I mean, when you start picking up the different kind of, mythological depictions of the ancient past and possible futures, those in literature become ways we think about how to relate to our present differently. And even the way you were talking about the questions you wanted to ask, like how angels responded to different things, like even what you laid out is similar to the kind of questions like Tolkien's asking in the Silmarillion when he's thinking about the creation of the creation stories in the Silmarillion, which was connected to one of the questions someone sent. And I don't even know if this is true. They said that you auditioned for the Lord of the Rings movie. I knew you were a Tolkien fan, but what kind of rumor is this?
It actually is very true.
It is?
I auditioned.
You just got cooler. How'd that happen?
I auditioned because at a point in my career, I was being repped by CAA in Los Angeles, and I had moved to LA, and I was doing a bunch of shows at the Viper Room on Sunset Strip. And a friend of mine was telling me about that they were making the Lord of the Rings films. And I was such a huge fan that I was like, I've got to audition. The stupidity of my narcissism was, if they just see me, they'll know that I'm supposed to be Frodo. You know what I mean? And so I actually auditioned in England, in London, on camera. And I had to do the dialogue where Sam and Frodo are on Mount Doom, and they're literally just getting ready to jump into the mountain. So it was the discourse where they were talking about, I don't know if I can do this, Sam. And being a rudimentary actor, I think I did all right. And, I had a cool look at that moment, it was cool, but, nobody can touch Elijah Wood's big, huge eyes, it's impossible to upstage that. So when they chose Elijah Wood, I was like, of course, he looks exactly like Frodo, in my
You're like,
mind.
maybe I should have gone for the Horseman of the Mark,
I should have gone for Gollum. Now, like a background elf would have been fine. I would have taken that. I would have even gotten all full orc, and done that as well. Anything to be in that film. But I guess I shot a little too high, right? I mean, I thought Frodo.
It was your first acting job,
It was like Frodo or nothing. How about Tom Bombadil?
See, I hope he's in the Amazon show.
I really do.
The Second Age, and like clearly they should cast you as an extra because like they know that you'll share about it. So I don't know who's in charge of this at Amazon, but Kevin
I'll take the cameo Tom Bombadil and run with it 100%. Or give me a lesser character, someone in the House of Numenor. I'm happy. So Lord of the Rings, I'm completely fascinated, always have been, always fascinated by sci-fi and the aliens. In fact, I'm following a guy that I don't know if you're following on Twitter, but the creator of the series Hellier, they're paranormal investigators. And Greg Newkirk is the guy that started the series Hellier. And, he has gone deep into finding the trail of writings about these troll characters that are showing up in caves near Kentucky. So, they have a lot of connection to the idea of the alien gray. So I get lost in that loophole too. And now all your listeners have gone from, maybe 800 people to 110, they're gone.
Well, I think I'm optimistic. So one of the questions that I was going to ask and then decided not to, but then you said, just go ahead and ask, what goes through your head when Jerry Jr. erupts, right? Like having been at Liberty and then also having been kind of in a sense blessed and cursed by what it represents in different ways. Like, how do you experience and kind of process those type of, I don't know, public explosions of sorts?
I look at it as like, people are full of strange and wayward ideas. And, he's been in a position where I think that he was able to kind of, I don't know, abuse the power a little bit. And maybe there's a little narcissism there. And certainly there's some misguidedness there. And so it wasn't really surprising to me, to be honest. I knew Jonathan Falwell more than Jerry. I'd actually never met Jerry Jr., so I didn't know much about him. I think the other two guys in the band knew him a little bit better than I did. I've never met him. But when I saw all that kind of stuff play out, I was just like, it wasn't surprising to me. I was just kind of like, well, yeah. I mean, And so that whole, world of Liberty University, I just hope and pray and that they progress as well. And that the students there, my thoughts go to the students, the people that are there like I was. My parents had kind of pushed me to go there. You know what I mean? I think about all these kids that are kind of like there because not on their own decision, but somebody else deciding for them, and how they're going to become better people and progress themselves. And I would hope that they would look at this and go, okay, there's something very wrong here, and let's move on. But
yeah, I mean, but that doesn't mean you have to get rid of the Blackwater. Maybe you just don't have to feel guilty when you're at costume parties with Blackwater. Blackwater
is interesting, right? Because I guess it was wine, right? Would it have been wine? I've never had a scotch. I never had a scotch that dark before, but it could have been a Guinness too.
Who knows? Or it could have just been water.
Maybe Blackwater. It could have been
Blackwater.
Blackwater.
Yeah. It started as a Guinness, and then he transubstantiated it into water so that he wouldn't get kicked out of his own school. So when you when you go on road trips, because you post a lot about your road trips and things, and you're sitting there, get the kids in the car, what is the album you feel like you succeed if they listen to the whole thing through? Like, what's the album when the kids think of road trip dad just picked that you hope, like, when they're your age and they hear it come on, they're like, oh, junk, this is dad's album. Be quiet, turn it up.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of them. I was going to make a joke and say Scott Walker, Bish Bosh, but like that would, it's like horror music. I've got a couple of kids in my family that love the dark, scary stuff, so they might really dig that. Recently, I've been playing The Strokes, the new Abnormal, and I love that record, and I play it quite a bit in the car, and the kids are just like, oh man, that record again. Oh, wow. But it's such a great album. I think the quintessential album to me that I tend to play a lot, and I know that I'm going to be, this is where I get picked apart, you know what I mean? But I'm a huge Smiths fan, so I'll play Meat is Murder a lot, and I'll talk to them about that, animal rights and animal activists around the world. Hey, people don't believe in eating meat at all. My daughter was really into that for a while, and now she's back into her hamburgers. I went vegan for a bit, and then I, went to pescatarian, and now I'm kind of back to, eating it all, and it's sad, but they hear a lot of Smiths from me, and a little bit of Beatles. I listen to the Beatles channel on XM, and I also listen to First Wave on XM, which is a lot of new wave music. And so they hear a lot of, like, the Fix and the Cure and the odd Gary Newman song, or Thompson Twins. So they get that a lot. But when I really want to bother them, I put in Radio Technica, and I just like let that one roll for a while.
Yeah. Could you just listen to your father do spoken word, please?
Like, can you imagine growing up? It's like Dad's going to make you listen to his spoken word album now.
You don't just like get out 30 lava lamps, set them around the house. You have everyone sit down. Like, now we're gonna spend some time in silence and deep breaths, and slowly music's gonna come on, and we're just gonna sit together, pick the lamp that calls forth to the song, and enjoy.
Yep.
You've tried so many different kind of types of art. Like, what's a type of creating that you wish you were good at, and now you're just the fan of? Right? Like, you're like, well, I can't do that. I wouldn't share that with someone. And so, like, you're the audience member for this type of art.
Yeah. Well, the first one that comes to mind is acting, because I tried my hand at it a little bit, and I'm okay. I did a little bit of theater in high school and a little bit in college. And I did act in a movie called The Imposter, which is absolutely horrendous. But, and then, of course, I did audition as Frodo in Lord of the Rings. So there's that.
So you're like one step from, Academy Award.
Then you're acting as yourself, and in different varying degrees in the spectrum, through music videos. Like, what face do I put on for this lyric? You know what I mean? So we're all actors. We're all acting to survive, right? And that was like one of my favorite things from Marlon Brando. I posted it on my Facebook the other day. Marlon Brando said, we're all acting to survive. And he's on the Dick Cavett show, and he's like, Dick, you are acting right now. You are acting. I can't do what you do. I can't affect this, kind of talk show host face to, make everybody happy. Marlon Brando is like a hero of mine. I think him and James Dean were ahead of everyone before acting really even became like a huge deal. And so I watched them, and I just studied them, and I just think it's so amazing what they were able to do. And somebody like a Gary Oldman today is like another version of that to me, where it's a method actor kind of thing, where he can take on so many different roles, and he's a different person in every film. And he just like a chameleon seeps into that thing, and you truly believe he's Winston Churchill, or you truly believe he's a pot smoking reggae guy. You know what I mean? You believe it. So that's a skill that I wish I had. I mean, I'm okay at it. I've just started painting, and that's another one. I'm going to really start painting now more and more, and I'm excited about that. Where I'm at, your viewers or listeners or supporters can't see this, but I'm in my studio, which is above my garage in my house. So I'm not, it's not detached, but it's in the back of my house. So this is kind of like my man cave. And I'm going to set up a painting area in the back here. And my kids are very interested in my idea of painting. I painted a thing for my wife. She asked for something to be put in our hallway. And I painted kind of an abstract 6-budded plant. It represented all the people in our family. And so now I've started painting these plant people, and it's starting to evolve into kind of like a morph into, a human or an alien. And we'll probably play with the spectrum of human and alien and angel and, whatever. So I'm excited about that, because I think what better thing to do in your 50s than to paint? Don't know if I'll be able to make a bunch of money on it, and I probably won't. And I'll continue to sing and make weird spoken word records until people tell me to stop,
But will the weird alien plant human hybrids be like floating on a planet in space on the Sad Astronaut cover? Like Little Prince had that little, the little planet that was in the middle of space.
Yeah, I definitely think we could do some xenomorphs and stuff on the cover. I don't want to be that literal with it, Like I feel like, Sad Astronaut's cover needs to be, a very kind of, surreal painting by somebody would be great. Or maybe just the odd picture of a door. I think if we took a picture of us in space with helmets on, we'd be doing the album wrong. Sad Astronauts, if I could talk about it real quick,
Yeah.
We go live to Kickstarter February 9th. So it's coming up very soon. And we're trying to get people to, go with us on the journey of making this record. And it's exciting. It's rock and roll. And we're already 15 songs in. We've written 15 tunes and going on 16 songs, and trying to figure out which songs make the record or not by the process of playing them live and feeling them out. But it's good. It's a good record. And I know records because I've made them my whole life, really. This one could be like one of the best records I've done as a solo artist, but I'm obviously in a band now, so I'm no longer a solo artist.
So maybe say a bit about your partnership with Eric. Like, how did y'all meet? And then the decision to attach again to a band. What was that like?
After Radio Technica, I went through this period of just kind of like, I don't really know if I'm interested in making another album as a solo artist. I feel like I've done everything I wanted to do. I've done 18 albums. And so the thought was to do something collaborative. And I don't know if that collaboration was a duet thing with people and I just thought the band situation seemed to be the most pure progression for me, is to go into being just a singer and a lyricist and collaborating with my guitar player, who's a great songwriter in his own mind and right. And, it being in a band is frustrating because, you've got to sacrifice your ideas for somebody else's ideas. And that's the whole idea of being in a band, is that, you're not going to every thought you have is not going to end up on the final take. It's highly collaborative. So that part of it's been exciting to me and also annoying. And that's what makes great art, in my opinion. The Beatles wouldn't have been, the Beatles had it not been for those guys in a room together, kind of with different opinions, coming up with stuff.
Mm-hmm. And maybe you want to say a bit about the first song that you released, because then we can, link up to it and send people over to check it out.
So the first song is actually the last song on the album. We decided to kind of go in reverse order, and alien technology told me to do that. I was like, what song do we throw out there first to people, to give them a glimpse of what we're doing? And we have so many songs that we could throw out there, and there's a lot of different styles on this record. my thought was, why not throw this song out that's literally going to end the record, In Space No One Can Hear You Weep, as kind of like the themology of the whole thing, and Eric was like, oh man, but that's not the greatest song on the record. It's like a deep cut. And I'm like, no, this will be fun. And so making that decision kind of informed some of the lyrics. And so I put Sad Astronauts in the actual lyric of the second verse, and told more of a story based on us, exploring into the unknown universe and floating away from everything that we had known into the great unknown. And the line about deconstructing from the hive meant that, we were, leaving behind all of our little core groups and looking to see what else is out there.
Yeah. Well, I'm really looking forward to it. And I like hearing you sing. I like the way that you are able to process out loud in your art. And I'm also just excited for the people who, because you're being, taking the risk of being more vocal about your questions and faith journey and stuff like that, the ones that get permission to move into new spaces, especially ones that are able to discover a deeper affirmation from God and a more beautiful vision for the world.
Absolutely. And I think that as a solo artist and as a band member in Sad Astronauts, and as a guy that's still in DC Talk, I really look forward to all of those things progressing as well. I mean, I feel like we're all progressing, and hopefully in better ways than not in negative ways. And, music is great because people relate to music so much quicker than spoken word or poetry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So my last question is, we've all been stuck inside for way too long. It's been too long since we've gone to a rock show.
You're in your basement. I mean, man, I'm above my garage. It's sad, right?
Yes. So if you could pick like 3 bands that were going to play together for your first chance to go to a live show with thousands of people ready to sing along with you, post, everyone having vaccines so it's safe, what 3 bands would go to the Kevin Max is so pumped he gets to go sing with a group of people at a loud rock show?
Yes. The top 2 tier would be the Cure and the Smiths. They just really don't get along very well. And I would love to see, Morrissey and Robert Smith just really collaborating together on stage, which would be highly entertaining and also amazing because they're incredible songwriters. And it might kind of devolve into, a fist fight or something really interesting. After those 2, it's kind of grab bag, but right now I would definitely love to see a band called Interpol. I saw them years ago in Athens, Georgia, at a small club called the 40 Watt, and thought they were one of the best bands I'd ever seen in my life. They kind of blew my mind a little bit because I didn't know much about them. And then all of a sudden, I'm seeing this band that sounds like Joy Division, but it's kind of like the Beatles, and it's kind of like, ELO, and it's all these things all at once. And I was just like, wow, kind of blown away. And I got really deep into their record, Turn on the Bright Lights. That's another album that my kids will have to hear. And the sounds are definitely a bit depressing, but, they were in New York City trying to create something brand new. So, I mean.
Yeah, and they wrote that album right after 9/11 in New York. That's the one that came out, I think, after 9/11.
I'd have to look into that, but yeah, maybe. You know more than me, Trip. You're more educated. I'm just a dumb blonde singer that, has a weird vibrato.
Well, I don't know if it's weird. I would think of how many people have attempted to cover it only to have high quality footage from some youth group event that can be held against them for their entire life.
Yes, but did you meet a wonderful girlfriend? Did you make friends with a wonderful female? I mean, that's the question.
Yeah, my wife and I, she was the first person that wasn't impressed. I was in a very mediocre rock band, and then I was like, so I have to try, huh?
Yeah.
I think that was her tactic, to be uninterested and me attempting to, be a Kevin Max impersonator. It's
a wonderful tactic. I mean, I was blown away when Ryan, what's the guy from One Republic? Ryan Tedder, is Kevin Max impersonation backstage before they were opening for U2. They invited us to watch them perform in front of U2, and he did his Kevin Max impersonation. And honestly, like, it's probably the best one I've ever heard. I got it on video somewhere, and I uploaded a few years back, I think, on my Instagram a couple years ago, about 3 or 4 years ago now. And he didn't disappoint. I mean, there were moments where I was just kind of, yeah, it's the tone isn't as good, and the vibrato's a little too fast, but it was close.
But yeah, he was approximating. Like, it, you got to give him credit for trying.
Absolutely.
So I didn't know who they were, right? And Trey Pearson from Everyday Sunday, like, after he came out and then was working on his first solo stuff, they were, I guess, songwriting together. And Trey was at my house when I was living in Redondo Beach in Los Angeles, and they were meeting up. He's like, hey, we got like half a day. We're working on this thing. Can we just use one of your offices at church? I was like, sure. And like, I went by, and I mean, I've known Trey a long time. So I took a picture with him. All of a sudden, everyone in my youth group are like, what? Who's it? Like, freaking out. I was like, oh, y'all know who that is? I was like, I just knew it was Trey's friend. And
yeah,
I didn't know to ask for an impersonation.
Well, what's really weird is that I met him in LA, but he had been a kid that wanted to get into Christian music, I guess, and wasn't successful in that marketplace, and moved to LA, became more of a songwriter, did some demos and stuff. But his band opened up for me at the Viper Room, and I hung out with him probably a week or two after that, and he played me the demo to I Don't Need to Apologize. I forgot the hook, but it's the Apologize song, that became so huge for them. And I remember sitting there in the room with him going, yeah, that's a pretty good song, and then all of a sudden, they're huge. But it's weird to see, somebody not make it in the Christian music marketplace and then become Paul McCartney's producer, or, writing songs with U2. It's like, well,
maybe it's because in Nashville, they were like, I mean, you do a pretty good, Kevin. But see, in LA, all the secular musicians, they didn't listen to DC Talk. So they're like, that's pretty good.
That was genius. That's gold, Trip. That's gold. Pure gold.
Well, I've really, really enjoyed talking to you. It's been a complete blast.
Yeah, me too. Much hope for the future, and maybe we'll be able to do this again. Maybe on another planet, in another body. And
well, if I get the podcast from another planet and I'm talking to our alien hospitality team, I'm going to tell them, like, look, I think the first religious podcast recorded on this planet with humans needs to involve me and Kevin. All right.
Yes.
That's just like, he's perfectly open to it. If you would go holler at him through whatever portal you're using, I'm pretty sure he'll say yes. Don't worry. He won't get freaked out. And, maybe he can do some paintings wise over here.
Yep. Program A starts with us. I love it.
Awesome. Yeah. Whoa. You know what all the cool kids do? Finish. Yeah. And you just finished this episode. Well done. Now I have a little question for you. Have you left a review wherever you get your podcast about homebrewed Christianity? I would love for you to do it, and be as honest as you want to be. Just give it 5 stars. No, I'd really appreciate it. It helps spread the word. And since you're here and you listen to the whole thing, you could flip over right now as you turn me off and go there. Go to your Apple Podcast. Go to whichever way you Stitcher. Like, I don't know where you listen, but just give it a 5-star rating, and then you can tell the truth after that. Thank you. You're a winner. All right. I'll talk to you later.